This is an overview of the breadboard series. This video, Breadboard Connections, is followed by 5 sets of PIC device tutorials, starting with the 8-pin PIC12 F1572 and ending with the 40-pin PIC16 F1789. We will look at the connections and the typical application circuit requirements for programming and debugging various PIC devices on a breadboard with the PICET4 and SNAP programmers. The PICET3's and PICET2's connections and requirements are also covered. The connections of PIC devices installed on a breadboard to PICET4 or SNAP programmer are for an 8-pin PIC12 F1572, the 14-pin PIC16 F1705, the 20-pin PIC16 F15345, the 28-pin PIC16 F1718, and the 40-pin PIC16 F1789. On the left, PICET2's connections, of which only pins 1 to 5 are required. Note the pin number and color code for easy reference to diagrams later on. These ICSP connections are basically the same for PICET3 and 4, with different pin descriptions for each device. For the video series that follow, only the PICET4 and SNAP will be used, although the PICET2 or 3 may also be used with older PIC devices they are able to detect. On the right, PICET2's typical application requirements with component values given as 10 kilo ohm resistor and a 0.1 microfarad capacitor, and for isolation circuitry either a Schottky type diode or a 470 ohm resistor. On the left, PICET3's ICSP connections. The same pin number and color codes are used for all PIC kits. On the right, PICET3's only application requirement, a 4K7 to 10 kilo ohm resistor required between VDD and VPP pins of device. Note, only pins 1 to 5 are required. On the left, PICET4's and SNAP ICSP connections, also only requiring pins 1 to 5. On the right, PICET4 and SNAP's only application requirement, a 10 to 50 kilo ohm resistor required between VDD and VPP pins of device. Here are the pin connection details for the PIC12 F1572 using the same color code as for the PICET or SNAP programmers. Here, the pin connection details for PIC16 F1705, the pin connection details for PIC16 F15345. Here are the pin connection details for PIC16 F1718 and the pin connection details for PIC16 F1789. Here is the PIC12 F1572 device connections to PICET4 on a breadboard with the required 10 to 50K resistor between VPP and VDD pins. There is no need to connect external power as the PICET4 can supply up to 50 mA of current at a selectable voltage to power the device and circuit for programming and debugging. An external power supply should be used where the application circuit requires more than the available 50 mA from PICET4. For an externally supplied application, the connections to device from the positive and negative power rails. In this scenario, the PICET4 is then configured to not supply power. This will be covered later in the device tutorials. The SNAP programmer is unable to supply power to the device and circuit, so always requires the external supply connections. Now for some information on using a breadboard for absolute beginners. The transparent green horizontal lines for row 1 to 4 are used to assist as a visual guide for which breadboard rows are being used. Each of these horizontal lines are internally connected for each row, but note that these internal connections are separated down the middle of the breadboard. So for row 1, A to E is internally connected, and for F to J of row 1 are also. This is the case for all rows down the rest of the breadboard. The power rails are internally connected for their whole length, but each side of power rails is separate from the other, so that if required, different voltage levels can be supplied to either side. For example, 5 volts and 3 volts for either side, or they can be connected for common negative and positive supplies at 5 volts or at 3 volts as required. Here is an example of the Picket 4's connections for a breadboard tutorial using the PIC16 F1705 and the connections to external power supply. Here's an example of the Picket 4's connections for a breadboard tutorial using the PIC16 F15 345 and the connections to external power supply. Here's an example of the Picket 4's connections for a breadboard tutorial using the PIC16 F1718 and the connections to external power supply. Note there are some pin positional changes from the previous 3 devices, and there are also 2 VSS connections required on the 28-pin device. Here's an example of the Picket 4's connections for a breadboard tutorial using the PIC16 F1789 and the connections to external power supply. Note there are 2 connections for both VDD and VSS required for this device. Thanks for watching. The next featured videos are development board for more details of the series on the PIC Micro X development kit, Curiosity Nano for more details of the series using the Nano adapter and evaluation boards. About PIC Micro tutorials if you missed the first video, software installations for advice and links assisting in setting up the software packages if you missed the second video. The breadboard series tutorials will become available first, followed by the development board and then the Curiosity Nano series tutorials. Please leave a comment on videos that may be of interest from the 3 video series and suggestions to help improve the content. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to receive updates on videos as they become available.